Okay, so good morning, everyone. So our first question today, this happened actually last week. You represent the buyer. The title company has informed you that the sellers have been funded. Your buyer arrives at the house and the seller has left trash cans filled to capacity and the garage has a lot of junk. This Friday afternoon, and the trash won't be picked up until Tuesday. Now what? So what? Somebody want to tell me what they would do? Anybody? The person this happened to isn't on here this morning, so. It got ugly, I will tell you. The buyers, the trash cans are full and clearly they probably had trash too. I've personally had to go to people's houses and help sellers get out too and move on the day of closing. So I think in this situation, being proactive, and you might, if you have this seller, you might say, hey, what day, I know we're closing on Wednesday, but what day is your trash pickup? It escalated to where the buyers were going to bring their trash over and dump it in our listing agent's front yard. That's how ugly it escalated to. So first thing you should do, obviously, is call the listing agent. Sometimes, in certain cases, you can arrange to have a special pickup for trash. And in this case, we were dealing with the holiday weekend. So that was not a possibility. And it just starts off on the wrong foot, I think, with the buyer trying to get in. And there was just paint and junk, things they had left up in the top of the garage, Christmas stuff that they decorated with. They didn't want it anymore. So some of it, they might have been trying to be nice, thinking that somebody else wanted their stuff, but in this case, they did not. So has anybody else had this situation happen?
Yep. Can I jump in?
What'd you do, Corey?
Yeah, I just tell my buyers up front, I said, we never know what might be left behind. I said, but if you get there and you find stuff that you don't want that the seller left, let me know and I'll come pick it up. No big deal. Nice. Just that after the closing, my job's done, but I want to keep that client's trust and I want to get those referrals. And those little things are something simple that I can do. And it seems to go a long ways. And I've only had one in the past 6 years call me and say, hey, we got a bunch of junk for you to pick up. Mm-hmm. So I think that might have helped avoid that too. That
right, I agree. Yep. I think too, when we have the seller, we have that conversation ahead of time. Because it is annoying. I imagine, I tried to put myself in the buyer's position. You pulling up and you look and the trash cans are just like Jamie has here where they're overflowing. And now it's Friday and I've got to deal with that till Tuesday. And I'm going to have my own trash. And so if we can talk to them in advance, hey, what's your pickup date so we can work with it. Anybody else have suggestions on that issue?
One more question.
Yeah.
Is that something that maybe, and I know we wouldn't want to be in the habit of this, but is that something we could say, hey, you know what? Our office dumpster is only half full right now. I'm sure we could put some things in that to get by. Is that a possibility?
It's probably an issue because typically we're sharing a dumpster with other folks in our building. And if they go to throw something in there and they see that, it's probably an issue.
Oh, yeah. Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll move on. Number 2, you represent the buyer. The seller has moved out of the house. The buyer requested to move in items in the garage prior to closing. So you've got the buyer, the seller has completely moved out, but your buyer wants possession of the garage. What form would you use to do that? Anybody?
Limited possession prior to closing, and then specify that the only thing they're going to have access to is the garage and what they're doing with it.
Right. Thank you, Kathy. That's correct. I'm going to tell you what happened this past week. So it's a 3-car garage. Our buyers, we have the buyers, wanted to move their items in. They open up and the sellers are saying, hey, you can only be there when I'm there. So all this is in writing. It was all very clear. The sellers wanted to be there when they were moving things in. Our buyers show up, they open the garage, and the 3-car garage, and the center of the garage is a car that doesn't run. And they don't want to move it. So now we've got one side of the garage. We're trying to get to the other side. And it's because our seller, the buyer is also a seller, has their house sold, and they're trying to get as much in the house as they possibly can. So in this case, I will tell you, I don't like using that form. You have to make sure that your buyer has basically renter's insurance for the items that they put in the garage. And what if something comes up missing? The buyer goes to unpack all these items and starts putting things away, and they believe something's missing. So now we've got other issues. So I don't recommend you do it, but I wanted to make sure that you knew. So if we go on to question number 3.
Lynn, oh,
yes?
Never mind. Yeah. I'll wait till the next question. Maybe
okay. So what's the difference between possession by buyer prior to closing and limited purpose?
Possession by buyer means they have access to the entire property. Limited purpose is just a specific area, and like the garage. And what I was going to say was, what I have always done in the past, if I do a limited purpose for them to put items in the garage, I always caution my sellers to make sure that the entry door from the garage to the house is locked when they're not there, yes. Because I've had buyers that have just moved, even though all they had access to was the garage door was unlocked to the inside. So they just started moving stuff inside too. Can't do that.
I've had that happen as well. And again, I think what I wanted to talk about this today is to be cautious. Your buyer is moving in, they need renter's insurance. Your sellers, like Kathy said, make sure the interior doors are all locked, access from the garage in there. Sometimes people may want access to the basement, and it can be, oh, there's a chat. It can be a bigger issue than what you think. So getting proper rental insurance is really important as well.
And when you
in this case, I want to take you back to my first question, where the seller agreed to give our buyers the access to the garage, and now they have a car stored in there, and our buyers want that car removed. What recourse do we have representing the buyer to make the seller move the car? Basically, none. I mean, I'd have to hire a lawyer to say, hey, move that car out, because you said we could have it, but by then we'll be closed and it's not worth it. So you have to think about, when you're using this form, what are some of the consequences that could go along with it, okay? All right, so number 4, you represent the buyer. The buyers used a special sales contract and signed the waiver for inspections. Again, if they're not having inspections or waiving their inspections on a regular sale contract, or you're using a special sale contract, you must get the waiver that they've declined having inspections. Yes, we want you to use the waiver when you use a special sale contract. Buyers move in and water has backed up in the basement. Now what? So this just happened. We had the buyers, we waived the inspections. And my first question is, what does the seller's disclosure statement say?
Mhm.
Guess what the answer was?
A dry
It's
basement.
blank.
Oh.
It's blank. If that were me, you as a buyer's agent, who are you representing?
If you're a buyer's agent, you're representing the buyer.
That's right. And so you've printed out the seller's disclosure statement. Are you looking at that? Are you going over it with them and saying, hey, you know what? There's a basement and they've left it blank. What do you think you should do at that point? What would you do, Steve? Oh, can't hear you. You're on mute. I think your volume's down. Anyway, okay, so if it's blank, I want you to look at it and go, you know what? I'm going to call the listing agent. They need to send over the seller's disclosure statement amendment and tell us what's going on in the basement. Here's the deal. When it's blank, that's not a good answer. There's a basement, there's questions, and the questions need to be answered. They're either yes or no, or I don't, something, but being blank does not get you off the hook. All right. In fact, we have a situation right now where it's turned into formal litigation because the seller left the basement portion blank and actually wrote in NA, and there's a basement. So not applicable wasn't the right answer. Okay, so you represent the seller. They've completed the seller's disclosure form, and upon reviewing it as representing the seller, they left the basement section blank. What would you do? How do you handle that as a listing agent? You're looking at the seller's disclosure statement. We all know you're not allowed to fill it out. You're not allowed to check any boxes, but how does that conversation look? How do you handle it? Neil?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. I would go back to the seller and ask them to try to fill everything out.
Yeah. Steve?
You can hear me now, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I mean, there's, I guess, nothing you can do, but you know, a lot of investors, they've never lived at the place, but they don't fill it out, but they've worked there. So there's got to be some kind of recourse we could do.
So let's say you inherited this property and, you know, it's your folks' home. Yes, you haven't lived there, but if you know of something, you have to disclose it. You don't just say, I never lived there. If you saw water coming in the basement, you know about it, you disclose it. You saw the leak on the roof some point, whatever it is, they have to disclose what they know, right? So, you know, it's a delicate situation. That's why I wanted to kind of use words this morning. Let's talk about how do I handle that? They sent me the seller's disclosure form and they left things blank. Corey, what about you?
Yeah, I address it. And if I sense that they're going to be deceitful, then I just say, you know, I can't list it until we're going to be honest. And I'll probably use different words directly with them. But bottom line is take the responsibility. Hey, if it's there, list it. And I share with them examples that I've had in the past. One of the biggest sources of litigation is water, and that has to be addressed. If it's happened one time, it has to be addressed. So yep. I communicate that to the sellers as clearly as I can and nicely as I can.
Right, perfect. Okay, let's go on to number 6. You represent the buyer. There is a propane gas tank that's buried on the property. Who pays for the remaining portion of the propane gas And how is it determined? Kathy or Corey probably have dealt with this.
Buyer normally pays for it, but I've seen it work out where the seller agrees just to leave it. It just depends on how much is in there and what they paid for it. It can be, as long as there's an agreement written up, that it can go with that agreement. But typically the contract states that the buyer pays for any leftover fuel.
That's right. It is a part of the contract that says that the buyer will credit the seller at closing for the amount that's in there. And the way you do that is you call whatever your gas service supplier is and have them come out and do a reading with what's left in the tank.
Right, that's correct. Yep. So it also says the fair market value of any heating oil or propane gas in the tank on the property at closing, based on the supplier's current charges, not what they paid in the past.
Right.
So in other words, 6 months ago, it might have been half the cost that it is today, but that doesn't matter. What matters is what it would cost today, what the current fuel charges are today. So should you be concerned who owns the propane tank since it's buried in the ground? So if the propane tank is in the ground, do you think the seller owns the propane tank?
Yes.
Steve, I saw you shaking your head.
Yes.
I guess would be yes.
Yeah, you should be concerned. I've had it happen where we assumed because it was buried that the buyer owned it, and indeed they did not. It was leased. So, and that there is that addition that was made on the seller's disclosure statement because of that. So be cautious. That when I'm talking about gas on this particular question, that also includes like heating oil and things like that, things that would stay with the property. And that could happen in the city too, where people have heating oil in their basement.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, number 7. You represent the seller. The property is a 2-family and one of the units has a tenant. One of the tenants is moving out before closing. You receive an offer on a special sale contract, no inspections. On the day of walkthrough, the buyer reads a note posted on the bathroom mirror. This toilet doesn't work properly. So you receive a final walkthrough notice that reads, seller will have a licensed plumber check the toilet. If there are any issues, the seller will repair the toilet and make sure it is functioning properly. Now what? This just happened.
Move closing.
Yeah, so
plumber out there before they close.
Yes, right. And at first it was kind of one of those situations like, well, they said no inspections, but when they wrote the offer, guess what? There was no note on the mirror. This tenant was a problem, so they were trying to create a problem for the landlord in this situation. So that note was not on the mirror at the time the contract was written. And in this scenario, we did send a plumber out to check the toilet and it worked fine. But I would suggest for those of you that do these multi-families, even a 2-family, especially when there's a tenant and they're being asked to move or they're moving, that you do a walkthrough before the buyer's agent does their walkthrough. Does that make sense? Because of what just happened. You might be able to prevent that from having to hire the plumber, where you could have gone in yourself and flushed the toilet and said it works fine. But instead, she did flush the toilet and it worked perfect, but because of the note and because of the final walkthrough statement, we were required to have a plumber check it. Any questions?
Yeah, what in that scenario, what if they hadn't walked through that unit? If the buyer had only viewed one unit and not the other, then what would you do?
Well, you know, it's on the buyer's agent to do the final walkthrough notice, but yes, that can happen. If you didn't do the walkthrough in the other unit, that would go on to the buyer's agent for not doing that. I mean, when you write the offer, if it's got tenants in it, I would say upon a mutually agreed contract, buyer has a right to do a walkthrough. A lot of them don't let you do a walkthrough when there's tenants in the property. But at some point, I would want to do one. Okay. You guys have, this is a very long question, so I want you to kind of follow along with me as you can, because this turned out to be kind of a big deal. So you represent the buyer. The property is located in the city of Arnold, and the offer is written on a residential sale contract. There is a gravel driveway. So the driveway, there's a house and there's two driveways. It's a U-shaped driveway. It goes all the way around the back of the house and comes around again to the front. And the reason I think for doing that was that street or road was very busy. So the gravel driveway that runs from the street and completely around the house and returns back on the same street, U-shaped. The first section is located on the seller's property to behind the house. The additional section is owned by a neighbor with an easement granting the owner permission to use for the property you are purchasing. Upon completion of the municipal inspection, the city required the gravel driveway be hard surfaced. Seller came back and agreed to hard surface only the section of the driveway that they owned. Your buyer wants the entire section hard surfaced. The seller notifies you on the 10th day that they will hard surface the driveway only on their portion of the driveway. Okay, so because now I told you the second part of the driveway is on the neighbor's property, and there's an easement, and the easement reads both parties will be responsible for the cost of repairs, etc., to the portion of the road easement. Now what? So here's where our agent was brilliant. On that, in the sales contract, in the residential sale contract, you have the municipal inspection by the seller, right? And they got 15 days typically to get the inspection, and they can come back. They could come back and say, hey, these are the things that are wrong, and we're going to fix these items, but not the balance. And then it becomes negotiating. But our agent wrote in, seller will provide a clear municipal inspection. So that is what helped protect this deal. So the buyer agreed to accept the seller's offer if they had agreed to accept it. So here's what happened. That seller ended up paving that entire driveway, which was $20,000 in addition to all the other things. But what happened with the easement on the neighbor's property, the easement says what? That they both will split the cost to have that road repaired. So we didn't want our buyers moving in, and then the neighbor puts their house up for sale and says, hey, we need $10,000 or $5,000 from you because the road has to be paved now because the city said no more gravel driveways. So I don't know if that's only in the city of Arnold, but I could see this happening in more and more rural areas where they're going to say no more gravel driveways. Has anybody else had this experience before? Corey?
No, not yet.
Okay, well, I just thought it was a good scenario. So when if in doubt and you think there might be where there's going to be some issues with the city, I would suggest you ask put in your special agreements that they'll provide a clear municipal inspection. So what you're doing is you're eliminating the negotiations of municipal inspection. Anybody have questions? Nope. Okay. Number 9, you represent the buyer. They write a backup offer and it is accepted. A week later, they decide to walk. What forms do you need? Sean? Where's he at? Sean, can you hear me?
I was on mute. So you need a mutual release and then that other form that I can't remember the name of right now.
Okay. So it's called the buyer's notice of termination.
Yes, that one.
A lot of people think you just have to do a mutual release, and that's obviously a mutual release is agreeable, but you need to do the notice because you send the mutual release over and the seller goes, yeah, guess what? We just put you in the primary location. We just moved you up to primary now. So you want to send that notice as well. And I think we're going to start seeing.
Not a
That's
separate.
right. Yes. Thank you, Creighton.
Yeah, I was looking for a separate form the other day.
Yeah, I wonder. Like Sunday morning.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Let me find that for you, Sean. And I'm looking and looking and looking. And then I went to Missouri forums, looking and looking and looking, and Sean finally found it.
I know it's one of those that you just, it's not named what you would think, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so number 10, you represent the seller. The buyer does a final walkthrough and requests all items to be removed from the basement. Sellers responds and agrees to the request. On the day of closing, the buyer asks to extend closing for 2 weeks and wants to have an environmental inspection because they noticed a white substance on the log cabin walls. What do you advise your seller? Do you throw in your hat and say, guess what? They've already had their walkthrough and I wouldn't let them have another walkthrough. Or what are you going to say? I think I'll call on Kathy for that one.
I was afraid you were going to do that. By the way, I didn't see that. I went out to pick up the lockbox and the sign, and I didn't see any evidence of what they were talking about. But, you know, we're not, maybe those people, the agent or the buyers have never seen a log house or know how a log house operates. And even if we have, if you've sold log houses before and you know how the wood operates itself, we're not specialists in that. We're realtors. That's our expertise. So my advice would be to have the sellers contact their attorney.
Yep. Here's what you don't advise. You don't advise your seller. You've got a buyer that's noticed something different. And when they purchased that log cabin, it was cold outside. Now they're running the air conditioner. We assume that the air conditioner probably got that wood damp and created that maybe some moisture. You know how it as it starts to heat up for summer, we get more humidity, right? So in this case, I would not throw in my hat and say, yeah, no, you're not having another, no other walkthrough, because of them requesting the environmental inspections. I was very concerned that if we said no and they came back and they found something different, they could definitely have a lawsuit. So what I don't want you to do is say, give your seller advice on something like that. Call me, call Jose, call someone, but don't just say, oh, nope, you're not getting another walkthrough.
So they would have
Okay.
to agree to extend the closing while they contacted their attorney, right?
Right, you could. Yep. You represent the buyer. They are writing an offer on a
Steve
property.
was waving his hand, Lynn.
What's that?
Steve was waving his hand on the last
Oh
question.
yeah, go ahead. I didn't see that.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, yeah, you can contact the attorney, but you're still at liberty to close that day though, right? I mean, the attorney's not going to get something done in a day.
Here's what I don't ever want you to say. I wouldn't close. I don't want you telling anybody don't close. Don't do that. You use those words and that will land you in court. What will they be in breach? Perhaps, but they better call their lawyer. We can't give legal advice, and that is definitely giving legal advice when you tell somebody not to close. If they want to close, there's one line in the sales contract and it says, it's because the buyer closes doesn't relieve them from their obligation.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, obviously, it's more difficult to go back on a seller after it closes, but we can't give it legal advice. And that is definitely considered legal advice, telling somebody whether they should close or not. Okay, so you represent the buyer. They are writing an offer on a property in University City. There are 2 large lion statues on the front porch. Do they stay?
No.
Creighton?
No. They're garden ornaments.
Okay.
They're not permanently unless they're permanently mounted, but just something like that that just sits on the steps. That's not a fixture.
So what does the inclusion section of the contract under exterior say? It reads exterior lighting, landscaping, and mailbox. And the word landscaping has many different definitions if you look it up. So are they considered part of the landscaping?
No.
Are you going to hang your hat on, they're on the top step, so they're not? Or are they down on the bottom portion near the sidewalk?
I look at it like, let's say they had a bird feeder out there, or they had a garden gnome or whatever, or planter box or something of that nature. Those, a lot of times they're left, but usually, I mean, the seller can take them unless they're written in.
So that's my point. If in doubt, write it out.
Yeah.
Right.
Most people think they stay because they're incredibly heavy and very expensive. And if you've never had to buy them before, you don't want to. I would say, I would definitely write it in. It could be a 50-50. If you were standing in front of a judge, you know what, you look again, I want you all sometime today, if you have time, look up the word landscaping and see, it's got many definitions.
Something like that, where it's like very prominent to the facade of the house, I definitely would ask the question, do you want the lines to stay or not?
Thank you. Yes, that's exactly right, Creighton. And you know what? How do I know if those are mounted on there or not? I'm looking at that thinking, yeah, they probably mounted those because they're heavy. And if they fell, they're not going anywhere. These look, the picture that Jamie has on here. But if you drive around U City, and I use U City because that's typically where you see them mostly, but any type of lawn ornament like that, if they tell you they want it, you should write it in.
It might have greyhounds or something like that on the steps.
Yes. Yes. And
Well, the other thing,
yeah, Rita.
well, the other thing is if your buyer doesn't want them and they want the seller to remove them, and removing them, they may cause the level of that shelf or whatever you call that to be kind of messed up. So they'd have to put something on that to make it look nice. And if they take it out and leave a big kind of hole, that's not going to be good. So that could be a little pickle thing to get through.
right? And sometimes people use that monkey glue or gorilla glue, whatever it is, and to adhere things so that it can't move. And then you go to take it up off of concrete, and it's not a good thing. It takes a lot of effort to get it removed. So
when sellers have stuff like that, or like say they've got grandma's chandelier hanging in the dining room that they're going to take with them, I always add that stuff into the listing agreement as well, that these things will not stay, but will be, like that chandelier would be replaced with something comparable, and then make sure that's in your advertising or your agent remarks to let them know.
Right. Good point. But always remember, the sales contract trumps that.
Right.
So if it's not written in,
have them take it down before they go on the market.
Exactly. That's the best advice. Because guess what? When you say you can't have that chandelier, what does that buyer want? They want that chandelier. Yeah, of course. Even though they're probably going to take it down and throw it in the trash, they still want that one. Yep. Okay, number 12, you represent the seller. The buyer's closing at a different title company. Closing is at 3 o'clock today. At 4:45, and the seller or their title company has not received the wire. The seller has not received the funds. Is it closed? Is the property closed?
If the funds are at the buyer's title company, it is.
If funds, seller shall be deemed to have received funds when funds are received by seller or seller's title company.
Okay.
Yep. So it is not closed until either the seller it's hit their bank or it's hit the seller's title company. And with that being said, sometimes sellers get ticked because the title company has the money, but it's not going to hit the seller's account until the next day. But it is considered closed because they've authorized the seller's title company to be one of the people that can receive the funds. Okay, who's responsible for getting the keys to the buyer?
Not the seller's responsibility.
Yep. So this happens too, where somebody says, the seller says, hey, the keys are at my house out in Arnold, and you can come pick them up whenever you want. No. Seller's responsible for getting the keys to the buyer. I see agents running around all the time doing things that the listing agent should be responsible for, and it goes on to the seller. Seller's responsible for getting the keys to the buyer. And I'm hearing sometimes, and I think it's a little dangerous, where the listing agent's throwing the keys in the mailbox. What would happen if you did that and the buyers didn't move in till the next day, and the house was some kid went through and got the keys out, went through the house and damaged it? Who do you think would be responsible for that?
I wonder.
Yeah, I would not be putting keys in the mailbox.
Lynn Buckmiller's responsible.
Thanks, Creighton. No.
It's against post office rules to put anything in mailboxes except the mail from the post office.
Right. That's exactly right. And we as agents, I mean, I've had some of my agents get in trouble before for hanging something on the outside of the mailbox, not allowed to touch it.
Just leave a combo lockbox and go get it later.
You can do that. Yep.
Question, Lynn.
Never mind.
Oh. I just had a question, Lynn.
What's that?
I just had a question. This is Joe.
Yeah. Okay.
So is it okay that the seller leaves the keys in a drawer in the kitchen at closing and says, oh, the keys, and then you're expecting them at the title company and they're actually in the house in a drawer?
Yeah, you can let the title company, here's been my experience, Joe. We've done that a lot where we've said to this title company, give them the keys, give the buyer the keys, when they close. Okay, buyer closed, but guess what? Seller doesn't have the money yet. Title company gives the keys to the buyer because that's what you've told them to do. And the buyer starts moving in and it's not closed. Now we got a situation where we got people moving into a house that don't own it.
Mhm.
You don't own it until the seller has the money. So I know a lot of people do it with the title company. They say, I'll call you. You could do that when you say the seller has the money, go ahead and let them have the keys. It works easier when both the buyer and seller are closing at the same title company.
Got it.
And you know what? This may not seem like a big deal to you. It's a really big deal when it happens to you and that the buyers are moving in and it's not closed. I had a situation last year where the seller moved way out of town. Next door neighbor calls and says, hey, I see our new neighbors moving in. And the seller's like, what do you mean they're moving in? We don't have our money yet. I get that phone call. We ended up having to call the police. The closing was 2 days later. There was complications with the wire and a lot of things can happen. We think everything's going smoothly until it doesn't. So until your seller has the money.
It really gets tricky if you've got like I call it a domino transaction where you've got multiple houses closing. You need to get them in there first thing in the morning.
Amen to that, Creighton. Good idea. Don't wait till 3 o'clock.
On the same page doing the same thing.
I don't know how many of you close at 3 o'clock, but you're really pushing closing to do that. And you know what? Sometimes I've had this happen where the wire is going through and all of a sudden the government sees this wire with a lot of money going and they go, whoa, wait a minute, and put a stop on it. And they're going to hold it and look into it. And it could delay it 24 hours while they review why so much money is being wired.
I think that was mine with the attorney, the seller, and the cop that was the buyer. That was a lot of fun, Lynn.
I kind of remember that deal. Okay, number 13, you represent the buyer. You receive a call from the title company that the seller is out of the country and has not supplied a seller's tax ID or green card. What are we talking about here?
That just happened.
FIRTA, FIRTA. Yes. So I haven't had this happen for many years, but it happened this week. And I want you all to go to the sales contract and read that. It's a small paragraph, but the title company is not going to be responsible for it. They may call and tell you, hey, we don't have the seller's ID or the green card. And if they don't have it and your buyer proceeds with the closing and there's a tax issue, that tax consequence will move over to the new buyer. That's right.
If I remember right, I think it's under the section where we put all the miscellaneous stuff. I think it's paragraphs either 16 or 17, if I remember right.
I think you're right. Yep. But make sure you take a couple minutes to read that. It's actually it's paragraph 17. It's just 2 sentences. Number 14, can a buyer have more than one walkthrough according to the sales contract? Anybody?
Sure.
It says 1, but guess what? If I have a buyer and we're walking through and this seller has a ton of junk laying around where we can't, like in the basement, it's just piled high, we can't really check things out, I might write in there that the buyer will have an additional walkthrough. But you would have to do that or do an amendment later on, which you probably wouldn't agree to, but I'd be proactive in asking for that to have an additional final walkthrough. And you all can kind of tell whether or not you need that. If there's a hoarder in that house, do you want your buyer, you're going to go, let's say you go the day before closing and it's still full of junk. Do you want to get another, and they tell you they're going to get it moved out. Do you want to give your buyer that opportunity to have another walkthrough? Probably.
Or you can go through it yourself for them.
Yep. You never want to do the final walkthrough for someone and be that as an agent and be that person that's looking to make sure all the items have been repaired. Who can go to the final walkthrough? Who's allowed to go to the final walkthrough?
Only the people who did the inspections.
Correct. So we have buyer's agent, we have the buyers, anyone who was involved in the inspection process has a right to go back through with your buyer. Anybody have anything else? Let's see, who's had something interesting this week? Joe, I thought you did. Something you called me about that was different.
Not this week.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I can't recall anyway.
Okay.
I've got one I can interject if you have time.
Yeah, I would love that.
It wasn't this week. It was a while back, but the buyer and the seller, I had the buyer and the seller ended up finding they had common groups in social media. So they ended up getting together and talking and whatnot about their common interests outside of the transaction. And my buyers were sharing with me that it looked like they were going to be able to become good friends and willing to work with them after they purchased the home with anything, whatever. So I was kind of leery about that, but everything seemed to be going well. So I left it. Buyers moved in and called me and said, Corey, there was junk everywhere. And they left a ton of stuff in the yard, dog poop everywhere in the yard. We couldn't even hardly walk in the yard without stepping on dog poop. And it's very upsetting. So I told them that if you can send me an email describing what exactly you are unhappy with, then I can definitely communicate to their agent and we can try to address that. And luckily, he calmed down and said, it'll be fine. They'll figure it out, whatnot. But that's the second pet poop complaint that I've had from buyers. Interesting.
Yeah, I can see that happening. Yep. A good closing gift sometimes for your new buyer or even your seller is to hire the cleaning people to come in and do that. And I don't know if some cleaning people might do the pet pickup too, but that's very annoying to have that happen when you move in and you got to clean somebody else's dog crap. Anybody else? Creighton, you got anything going on?
Hey, I got a question about the dog poop.
Okay.
So in that particular house, Joe, did you notice when you all were doing inspections or showing it that there was a lot of dog poop out in the yard? I mean, was this kind of a pre-existing, do you have any heads up that it might be an issue?
Corey?
Oh, you said Joe. When we did our, there was snow on the ground for the walkthrough. Couldn't see it.
Gotcha.
Yep. We knew there were pets.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Creighton. If I'm showing a house and they have two great big labs, for example, I might write that in to the contract that you'd have to use some some delicate words, but in the special sale contract.
On the other
yard
one,
will be removed from all waste, pet waste.
yeah. On the other one, I represented the seller, and the buyer's agent contacted me. And my sellers were also, I was representing them as buyers on another transaction, young family, 2 kids, full-time, both working full-time, one on the way. I mean, it was hard enough for them just to get everything done. And I even mentioned to them, hey guys, we need to get the yard cleaned up. They did a lot, but I'm like, you know what? These are repeat clients. I went in there and I picked up the yard for that buyer, and that agent remembered that, and the buyers were very thankful. I think I have clients for life just from a simple thing like that.
That was very nice of you, Corey.
Above and beyond.
Yep, that's what we do. We're all rock stars, right? But you probably did make a friend for life. Do you know, Corey, I'm glad you brought that up about asking the buyer to send you an email, because it shouldn't be your words to the listing agent. Hey, you need to get your people over there to clean that up, blah, blah, blah. Have your client write the email, you forward it to the other agent. Try to keep yourself at a distance as much as you can. If they call and say, hey, we noticed, you know, a little leak in the roof or something, it's not us telling the other agent, it's your client writing an email, giving you permission to forward that email to the listing agent.
Absolutely. Great advice from my broker named Lynn, and I've used it ever since.
Okay. It just protects us, because if they if it ends up being a legal situation and they get a lawyer, they can come back and say, well, Creighton, you didn't use the right words.
Man, we always want your up over shit, you know.
Yeah. All right. I hope you all have a great weekend. It's supposed to be beautiful outside.